Ms. Kagan, let me join Chairman Leahy in welcoming you here today. This nomination is certainly a proud day for you and your family and your friends, and rightfully so. I enjoyed very much our meeting a few weeks ago and appreciated the chance to talk with you then. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your work on this nomination. As I have pledged, Republicans are committed to conducting this hearing in a thoughtful and respectful manner. It's not a coronation, as I've said, but a confirmation process. Serious and substantive questions will be asked. Ms. Kagan will be given ample opportunity to respond. Ms. Kagan certainly has numerous talents and many good qualities, but there are serious concerns about this nomination. Ms. Kagan has less real legal experience of any nominee in at least 50 years, and it's not just that the nominee has not been a judge. She has barely practiced law, and not with the intensity and duration from which I think real legal understanding occurs. Ms. Kagan has never tried a case before a jury. She argued her first appellate case just 9 months ago. While academia certainly has value, there is no substitute, I think, for being in the harness of the law, handling real cases over a period of years. What Ms. Kagan's public record does reveal is a more extensive background in policy, politics, mixed with law. Ms. Kagan's college thesis on socialism in New York seems to bemoan socialism's demise there. In her master's thesis, she affirmed the activist tendencies of the Earl Warren Court, but complained that they could have done a better job of justifying their activism. President Obama's nominee has started her political career in earnest as a staffer on the presidential campaign of Michael Dukakis. She took leave from teaching at law school to work for this committee under then-Chairman Joe Biden to help secure the nomination of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a former counsel for the ACLU and now one of the most active members of justices on the Supreme Court. And I know you would join with me, Mr. Chairman, expressing our sympathy to Justice Ginsburg on the loss of her husband also.
A wonderful man.
Professor Kagan left teaching law to spend 5 years at the center of politics, working in the Clinton White House, doing, as she described it, mostly policy work. Policy is quite different than intense legal work. For example, in the Office of Legal Counsel or some of the divisions in the Department of Justice. During her White House years, the nominee was the central figure in the Clinton-Gore effort to restrict gun rights, and as a dramatic 5-4 decision today in the McDonald case shows, the personal right of every American to own a gun hangs by a single vote on the Supreme Court. Ms. Kagan was also the point person for the Clinton administration's effort to block congressional restrictions on partial birth abortions. Indeed, documents show that she was perhaps the key person who convinced President Clinton to change his mind from supporting to opposing legislation that would have banned that procedure. During her time as dean at Harvard, Ms. Kagan reversed Harvard's existing policy and kicked the military out of the recruiting office in violation of federal law. Her actions punished the military and demeaned our soldiers as they were courageously fighting for our country in 2 wars overseas. As someone who feels the burden of sending such young men and women into harm's way, and who spent much time drafting and redrafting legislation to ensure military recruiters were treated fairly on campus, I can't take this issue lightly. Dean Kagan also joined with 3 other law school deans to write a letter in opposition to Senator Graham's legislation establishing procedures for determining who was an enemy combatant in the war on terror. She compared this legislation, which passed 84-14, to the fundamentally lawless actions of dictatorships. Most recently, the nominee served as Solicitor General for a little over a year, but her short tenure there has not been without controversy. In her first appellate argument, Ms. Kagan told the court that the speech and press guarantees in the First Amendment would allow the federal government to ban the publication of pamphlets discussing political issues before an election. I would remind my colleagues that the American Revolution was in no small part spurred by just such political pamphlets, Thomas Paine's Common Sense. To suggest that the government now has the power to suppress that kind of speech is breathtaking. Also, as Solicitor General, Ms. Kagan approved the filing of a brief to the Supreme Court asking that it strike down provisions of the Legal Arizona Workers Act, which suspends or revokes business licenses of corporations which knowingly hire illegal immigrants, even though federal law expressly prohibits such hiring. She did this even after the liberal Ninth Circuit had upheld the law. This is an important legal issue that the court will resolve during the next term. And despite promises to this committee that she would vigorously defend the Congress's don't ask, don't tell policy for the military, if it were challenged in court, the actions she has taken as Solicitor General do appear to have deliberately and unnecessarily placed that law in jeopardy. Importantly, throughout her career, Ms. Kagan has associated herself with well-known activist judges who have used their power to redefine the meaning of words of our Constitution and laws in ways that, not surprisingly, have the result of advancing that judge's preferred social policies and agendas. She clerked for Judge Mikva and Justice Marshall, each well-known activist, and she has called Israeli Judge Aaron Barak, who has been described as the most activist judge in the world, as her hero. These judges really don't deny their activist ideas, they advocate it, and they openly criticize the idea that a judge is merely a neutral umpire. Few would dispute this record tells us much about the nominee. In many respects, Ms. Kagan's career has been consumed more by politics than law, and this does worry many Americans. In the wake of one of the largest expansions of government power in history, many Americans are worried about Washington's disregard for limits on its power. Americans know that our exceptional Constitution was written to ensure that our federal government is one of limited, separated powers and part of a federal-state system with individual rights reserved to our free people. But we've watched as the President and Congress have purchased ownership shares in banks, nationalized car companies, seized control of the student loan industry, taken over large sectors of our nation's health care system, and burdened generations of Americans with crippling debt. So this all sounds a lot like the progressive philosophy which became fashionable among elite intellectuals a century ago and which is now seeing a revival. They saw the Constitution as an outdated impediment to their expansive vision for a new social and political order in America. Even today, President Obama advocates a judicial philosophy that calls on judges to base their decisions on empathy and their broader vision of what America should be. He suggests that his nominee shares those views. Our legal system does not allow such an approach. Americans want a judge that will be a check on government overreach, not a rubber stamp. No individual nominated by a president of either party should be confirmed as a judge if he or she does not understand that the judge's role is to fairly settle disputes of law and not set policy for the nation. Broad affirmations of fidelity to law during these hearings will not settle the question. One's record also speaks loudly. Indeed, it's easy to pledge fidelity to law when you believe you can change its meaning later if you become a judge. Ms. Kagan has called previous confirmation hearings vapid and hollow. Some probably have been, and have argued that nominees for a lifetime position owe a greater degree of candor and openness to the committee. I agree with that. I agree that candor is needed and look forward to this good exchange this week, Mr. Chairman.